us thinking these projections on the wall of a cave are reality, not knowing that those two-dimensional projections from a fire behind us and shadows in the dark have nothing to do with the real world. We back with another reflection on the Daily Vedantic, and today's episode is on a question that I got recently from a member of the Venice Vedanta Club, where they asked, is Advaita Vedanta the same as European continental idealism? Idealism is specifically German idealism, although Barclay, even though it's spelled Berkeley like the city Berkeley, it's pronounced Barclay. George Berkeley had a very similar idealist framework to Vedanta, but it's predominantly known for the German lineage of idealist thinkers, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer. And the question is how does Vedanta compare and contrast to idealism? First, let's start with a background on idealism. And I am no expert on continental philosophy, but idealism is compared to Vedanta enough to where I'm familiar with the tenets of German idealism, specifically Schopenhauer famously extolled the Upanishads as the highest articulation of what's happening in the world that humans have ever come up with. I think his quote, and I'll look it up right now, Schopenhauer quote on the Upanishads. In the whole world, there is no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life. It will be the solace of my death. And that's from The World as Will and Representation, 1818. So, and then another one, slightly less known, but equally powerful. The Upanishads are the product of the highest human wisdom. Their treasures have not only refreshed my mind, but also consoled my soul. So, you have the praise of the Vedantic wisdom from someone like Schopenhauer, but the idealist movement is predominantly driven by this view that the world is a projection. The universe, the external material world, is a projection of the mind. That is very close to Vedanta and what the Upanishads and the Vedas. Vedanta just means end of the Vedas. That's where the Upanishads are. They're at the end of the 4 philosophical textbooks called the Vedas. And the Vedas or the Upanishads are often, it's articulated in a very similar way. Sometimes just said it's a projection of the mind. That this world, much like a dream, like an elevated version of a dream, is a projection of the mind. This table in front of me is a projection of the mind, even if it feels real. I can see the color. I can feel the surface. It's no different than the dream you might have had 8 hours ago, where it felt real, and your perceptions of a table, of other people, of sounds and sights, you could have sworn were real, and yet those were obviously a projection of your mind. They were not real. No matter how convinced we were, they were not real, and it's a proof point that our perceptions, touch, sight, these perceptions, sounds, talking with other people in a dream, actually have nothing to do with what's real and what's not. So, like I said, it's often reduced down to a phrase of this is all a projection of the mind. But the technical description is this is a projection of ignorance, a misapprehension of what is really going on, a superimposition of a movie happening on a screen, where we're perceiving a movie instead of the screen. And if someone says, hey, there's a screen, we look and we say, no, there's a car chase, or there's a dramatic sequence of events happening. And the knower says, no, it's just a screen. There's nothing actually happening right there. This is very different than saying that it's a projection of the mind. Although it sounds similar and it's 95% overlap, the mind, according to Vedanta, is a projection as well. The mind is part of the projection. The mind, the seat of our feelings, our preferences, likes, dislikes, our emotions. You have 3 equipments to navigate the world according to Vedanta. A body, which we all can attest to, seems straightforward. A mind, which we also generally agree with. We've got a mind. And then this philosophy, the central practical contribution to our daily lives is this very point that you have another internal equipment, 3 equipments, 2 of them internal, more than just a mind. You have this other internal equipment of the intellect that guides the mind. That is sadly never discussed in our approach to daily living in the West. But that intellect, that is meant to guide the mind like an adult in a room. The mind is a beautiful, beautiful equipment. It is like a 5-year-old child. Amazing to have in the room, but you wouldn't leave them at home alone. Or it is described like a powerful river, where it's amazing to have a powerful river. But the intellect is like the strong banks that keep the river from flooding the plain lands and destroying everything in its path. So the difference between idealism and, I'd say, Berkeley's idealism is extremely close to Vedanta. His view is that it's not a projection of our mind. The material world is a projection of God's mind. This philosophy would say even the projection that God has a mind is a projection, but not of anything to do with us. It's a misapprehension of awareness itself. The base level ground of being, awareness itself. Misapprehending, superimposing something like the mind on top of it as well. It would be like saying there aren't people in a car chase in that direction, even though it really looks like that's taking place. That it's just a projection of a projector behind us. But then, to take it a step further, it's to say there is no projector. You're just hallucinating it. And all that really is the screen upon which anything can be projected upon it. It's not the mind that's projecting it. It is our veil of ignorance that doesn't see the screen, that mistakes what is for the screen. It's not seeing what is at the base of all of these things that this philosophy says is unity. It's a misapprehension of name and form, is what it's often called, of thinking this table, this chair, and this wall are all separate, and then being told that there is wood that makes up all of those 3 things. And saying, no, it's the chair that makes up the chair, the table that makes up the table, the wall that makes up the wall, and being told again, no. Wood makes up those things. And superimposing name and form on top of this substratum of unity, of woodness. And that's what this philosophy is saying. There is a superimposition, a veil of ignorance that sees name and form, that upon enlightenment only sees the substratum that makes up all of our selective choices of name and form. Our opinions of things being separate, our superimposition of things being separate and different. And at the heart of all this material, these things that we think are separate, is just God's stuff, misapprehended as a table, as a chair, as other people, as the sky, as clouds. So, idealism is very similar, but it has that slight distinction that the mind itself is also a projection. Our own mind, or Berkeley's version of we're all just in God's mind. God doesn't have a mind, at least according to Advaita Vedanta. That would be one last remaining piece of a misapprehension. Not saying one view is better than the other, just wanted to give some delineation and definition between the two. And it goes without saying how strikingly similar the lines of thinking are, and how they probably they were influenced by Vedic thought. But it is certainly mind-blowing to think about how this theme comes up again and again and again, from philosophers to quantum scientists. We just did an episode, Schrodinger's dog, about one of the most eminent quantum physicists, also revering the Upanishads for, in his opinion, articulating what's really happening more accurately than anything else. That's a quantum physicist. Or you go back and you have Socrates and his allegory of the cave. Us thinking these projections on the wall of a cave are reality, not knowing that those two-dimensional projections from a fire behind us and shadows in the dark have nothing to do with the real world, with reality. And it's so different that it's blinding. And it's so different that when that person comes back and descends from the blinding reality and tries to explain it to the other people of the cave, they can't comprehend it to the degree that they actually want to kill the guy, because it is so different than what they are absolutely convinced is real. That is today's reflection on the daily Vedantic. As the Rig Veda says, the truth is one, sages call it by many names. It's always fun and fascinating to see how this theme comes up over and over and over again. And similar to the episode we did the other day of ChatGOT, or ChatGOD, where AI seems to suggest a very similar description of reality. Monistic idealism was the articulation it gave. I have a feeling this theme is going to continue to come up again and again and again. Maybe even more so in the next century, because of the access to information, to science, to philosophy, that we now have at our fingertips to a degree we've never even come close in humanity. And perhaps over the next century, the ascension to truth through the incredible access we have with technology, like wherever you're listening to this, or through the entire corpus of written human language at our fingertips to ask any question with something like AI, perhaps the ascension will be easier than ever. Just as unbelievable as ever, but maybe a bit more discoverable than ever before. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.